Welcome to the Six Sims of Manufacturing podcast. I'm your host, Adrienne Temple. In today's episode, we'll navigate the complex world of supply chain management, exploring innovative strategies that are transforming procurement, logistics, and the flow of goods. Join us to discover the latest trends and resources enhancing efficiency and resilience in supply chains, along with insights from my colleague, Rhonda Huskins, about building your local supplier network and mitigating risk. So grab a coffee, sit back, and let's dive into the subject of supply chain excellence. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get started. Rhonda, thank you so much for joining me on this show today. It's so nice to have a colleague on here. And I really wanted to just jump straight in and let the audience know a little bit more about your background because you've been with the MEP system after your manufacturing career for quite some time, and now you're working in supply chain. So could you share a little bit more about your background, kind of how you got to this point in supply chain with SCMEP?
Absolutely. Thank you, Adrienne, for the opportunity to speak to your audience. My background is actually industrial engineering by my education. I spent almost 20 years in manufacturing before I stumbled across SCMEP back in the late 90s. And then I've had the absolute pleasure of being here for, I think if you count my actual work years, it's 25-ish. There were I took a couple year break and then came back. However, my activities here was primarily in business development for all those years, and I've lost count of how many actually counties I worked in over those years. But my last few years, I primarily was responsible for business development in 10. And so this past almost a year, I've been involved in our supply chain efforts. We received some grant funding back in 2023 that was going to carry us forward 2 years to help solve supply chain problems in South Carolina and across the U.S. So all the MEPs are working individually and together to help make it easier for companies to find suppliers, more local or onshore if they were offshoring, or near shore if they're shipping if they're shipping things across. I even some neighbor sourcing. I'm trying to connect companies to other companies that are actually maybe even in their same county or in their same region. It shortens that transportation and reduce some of their costs. So we're excited to be working on this.
Yeah, that's awesome. So how are you making those connections? Like how are we facilitating some of that B2B opportunity where, like you said, trying to source at least more, close by or at least domestically? What's the mechanism? How are you doing that?
Well, there's a couple avenues for that. So traditionally, the MEP has been set up to help find companies, to supply companies that have a need. So if you have something that you've not been able to find on your own, you could reach out to your MEP and we could put the word out across the nation that we've got a company in South Carolina that needs X and they can't find it. So we're not your sourcing people. Though some companies would love for us to. We don't have the manpower for that. But if you have special things that you just can't find a resource for with all your regular opportunities to look, then you can reach out to the MEP and then we'll put it into the network. And that's called supplier sourcing. And so every week I get, I don't know, 20 to 40 of these from MEPs across the nation saying, we've got companies looking for this. Now, a lot of them are buying under programs where it has to be BABA compliant, Buy America, Build America. So they're looking for companies that have materials that are primarily sourced in the U.S., a certain percentage are materials in the U.S., and a certain percentage of the labor's in the U.S. And so we're getting a lot more of those these days. And then what we've added to that under this federal grant is what's called CONNEX, and it's CONNEX. It's part of the CONNEX Marketplace, which is a national supplier searching database. So in South Carolina, we were able to partner with the South Carolina Department of Commerce and use some funding and purchase a state level access for our companies in South Carolina. So if you're a manufacturer in South Carolina and we're able to vet that you're actually doing something here, then we can give you access to this database. And then you can either search for suppliers or you can search for business opportunities there.
That's outstanding. Now, is just manufacturers to manufacturers, right? So it's not
It is
all business services. Okay, so it's just manufacturer to manufacturer. Is there is it nationwide as well, just state focused, like South Carolina focused? I know you said Department of Commerce is kind of helping to support that at the state level. Is there additional exposure nationally besides the supplier scouting?
Yes, there is. Within the CONNEX Marketplace, so it is headquartered in Utah, and it actually started during COVID to help manufacturers find PPE back in the day. But it became very popular, and it grew into manufacturers looking for manufacturers of everything, not just PPE. So there is a national level access that if companies are interested, they can actually sign up for that through the CONNEX Marketplace. They pay an annual fee. Currently, it's $500 a year, but I think it's going up in the next few months. So if you're interested, sign up quick. However, none of that money comes back to us or the state. That is truly for the people that own and manage that platform. That's honestly, that's how they make money. It's how they stay in business. But we've been very fortunate to be able to leverage the commerce funds and let the states have state access for free. So it doesn't cost them anything to get in for state access. And then if they like it and they want national access, then they're free to do that on their own.
Yeah, that's an extraordinary opportunity to be able to have access to the state
Mhm.
level with all of the manufacturers that we have here as well. I mean, what when you look at kind of the folks that are currently taking advantage of the Connects database in the state, what kind of problems are they trying to solve? I mean, is it that they just have to overcome the fact they've got some suppliers that have been too far out and the cost is getting too high? I mean, what problems do you think it's helping to solve for those manufacturers in the state right now, having access to that regionally?
Well, I think it's solving a couple things. As you remember back during the pandemic, we had that whole supply chain crisis, right? There
Right.
were disruptions everywhere. There were labor shortages. You had companies, you had plants shutting down, you had congestion at the ports, you had all these challenges. And companies have come out of that a little bit scorched. We weren't prepared for that. I mean,
Mhm.
nobody in the world was really prepared for that. And it's like, you know what? I need to take some action to kind of protect myself in case something goes awry again. So that's one of the reasons companies are actually looking to maybe diversify their supply chain and to find alternate suppliers. I don't know how many times we do our our grant funded operations assessment, either the competitors review or the rapid discovery assessment for companies, and find out that they may have 50 or more percent of their work tied up with like one customer, or they may have 50 more percent of their supply tied up, a primary material with one supplier. And so that's not wise to do it either way if you have alternatives. So this is helping companies find alternatives to just like the single source supplier. It gives them a foundation from which to maybe get more competitive on their pricing. And if they can get suppliers that are closer to them, then they can reduce some of those transportation costs. Now, another thing that's happening now globally is the whole focus on sustainability. Companies are looking for reducing their carbon footprint, and how do I, if I reduce my transportation distance, I may still have to have a truck, but if I reduce my transportation distance, then that's less emissions and those sort of things. So there's a lot of drivers to that. And then it's just always, what can I do more cost competitive? Smaller companies are also more agile. A lot of times they can shift. And we have a lot of smaller manufacturers in South Carolina. So if your demand changes and you have to ramp up or ramp down, a lot of times a smaller company can react to that smaller supplier faster than some big supplier that you're buying for, particularly if you're a little guy and they're big pond of customers, right? But so they're not gonna care so much that your needs change, but a smaller company will, and they can actually respond to that quicker.
Yeah, you mentioned the whole 2020 thing and the supply chain. I mean, that's a good conversation topic because I think it's probably the first time that I've ever seen where all the way at the consumer level, everybody was using the same language about supply chain. Like, I don't know
Mhm.
how that happened, but everybody suddenly understood supply chain was an issue. And what do you think were some of the factors that drove some of the hiccups that we started to experience all the way down the line when you look at that from a supply chain perspective? I mean, all of a sudden we had all kinds of issues and shortages of things, and everybody seemed to understand that they were completely cut off from the goods that they wanted. But what were some of the main drivers during that particular situation that brought all this to light?
Okay, that's a really good question. I think probably the primary was labor shortages. You had people who were either getting sick, or you had people that had been exposed to people getting sick, or then you had the people that were afraid they would get sick. But in either case, you had all across the world, you had people that weren't going to work. And so labor shortages were just the kind of that base level driver for then everything that happened after that. So then you had some countries, and then here you had some states that just shut down. They shut down everything, right? Not only can you not go to the doctor, but you can't go to work, you can't go anywhere. And so that continued to exacerbate that problem, right? And then as we came out of that just a little bit here in the States, changes were made in how unemployment was paid, and some people were making more to stay home than they were to work. So even though the jobs opened back up, we had people that didn't want to go back to work. They got used to being home. And human nature is the path of least resistance. A lot of times we're just happy staying home. But
Right.
then you had other things. You had the global interdependency of supply chains where I might be okay a little bit locally, but I've got this base raw material that can only be dug out of the ground in India, and I can only get it from Asia. So you had those things. You had the logistical challenges like the ports. The ports were suffering from their own labor shortages, and then as the demand, increased because everybody's screaming and they're trying to get things on a boat to get it here, then you had all these carriers backed up. And I remember being on vacation in Hilton Head in November of 2020. And whereas I could look out on the horizon from our room, we always stay in the same place and see maybe a shrimp boat out there at night. There literally was a line of lights all the way across the horizon in the ocean, and I was like, that is such an anomaly. I'd never seen that before. And then as I investigated a little bit, I found out the port of Savannah was backed up. And those were container ships that had goods on them that companies knew were sitting out there that they couldn't access because they're backed up and they couldn't get unloaded. So you had a shortage of containers, you had a shortage of trucks running to and from the port. It was just, I mean, it was the perfect storm. It was really a hot mess.
Yeah, as a compounding issue, right? And it's funny. I do think that from a supply chain standpoint, I think it just brought to light. I don't think people realize, where a lot of the subcomponents or materials come from for manufacturing in the United States. So I think all of a sudden it sort of put it on a world stage that there are a lot of things that are made from components that are sourced internationally, right? And I don't think people realize what could happen
Hmm.
if, in this case it was a pandemic, but there's lots of things that can happen that could cause disruption, and you don't have an alternative. All of a sudden everybody was kind of choked off from the same supply base in certain countries perhaps, and I don't think people were aware that that was a real issue. And it really caused some problems for a lot of people.
That's true. And while at a consumer level, it was very educational for a lot of people who maybe aren't in industry, or they have jobs in industry, but they're not really involved in that, to not really fully understand where things come from. But
Mhm.
unfortunately, a lot of our manufacturers didn't have really good visibility into their own supply chain. They knew who they bought from, but they didn't know who their suppliers bought from. And so where a really good supply chain strategy is to understand everything that comes to your door, where it originated and where all those steps are in between, and also to be able to kind of keep an eye out there and prepare yourself if you see something a little funny going on in a country far far away that may affect their economy, and think through how could that affect us, and what strategies can we put in place to protect ourselves. And companies, we're trying to get companies to think about doing that now, and some of the bigger companies had a lot of that in place, but a lot of smaller companies had never really thought that way before. They just knew they bought parts from Joe, in Oregon, but they really hadn't thought about where Joe got his stuff. And so there's been a lot of lessons learned, a lot of lessons learned.
Oh, I can only imagine, and obviously it's kind of not only how you deal with the situation, but what you learn from it and what you do as a result
Hmm.
of it, right? So, I mean, at this point, you mentioned some things, but have you seen just in discussions with some of these manufacturers and the fact that they're enlisting services for supplier scouting and that kind of stuff, are you seeing specific, mitigation or risk management strategies they're coming up with as a result of what happened, in 2020 and beyond? I mean, are there things that people are like adopting? Like you said, is it visibility of the supply chain or asking really good questions or um, dual sourcing? I mean, are there things that stand out to you that people have started to kind of shift towards to insulate themselves from risk, whether it's associated with another pandemic or some other, like you said, economic issue or whatever? I mean, is there
Right.
anything you've seen beyond some of those things that you already mentioned?
There are some. We have a few companies. We have a new supply chain maturity assessment, and so that's kind of we're just putting the polishing touches on that. We've already had a couple of companies engage with us and say, yes, we'd like to look at our supply chain and see where we can actually make improvements. So that is one thing I'm seeing companies doing, and now that we have that, it's also funded by grant money, so it doesn't cost anything for a company to get that kind of a big picture look at their own supply chain. We aren't mapping their chain. We're not doing that level. We have the capability to do those services. We've got folks that can map their supply chain and tell them, help them figure out where that's coming from. But we're taking a big picture look at what their strategy is, how they're mitigating their own risk, how's their information infrastructure set up, is it serving them well, those kind of things, and then making recommendations. But others, the simpler things is just diversifying, trying to find, suppliers that are closer to you, strengthening your supplier relationships. That's one that really proactive companies are good at, making their suppliers their partner instead of just somebody they buy from.
Mhm.
And so strengthening this, fostering those strong collaborative relationships where you can problem solve together. You want them to have such a great relationship with you when they see a problem in their supply chain that they're giving you a heads up, right? And they're going,
Yeah.
hey, I could use your help. Maybe we can find a workaround for this together if this bad thing happens or whatever. Enhancing their inventory management. Some companies were caught with too little inventory, while traditionally companies have carried too much.
Hmm.
A lot of them have gotten on the bandwagon of minimizing inventory, and there's some positives about operating at a minimum, but there's also right sizing inventory, right? Whether it's
Right.
putting in a Kanban system. So you can right size that safety stock and then have a really good management system for taking care of that. And that's something we've been helping companies do for a long, long time. But I see that as an increasing interest, and I need to make sure that I've got a really good handle on my inventories, and I'm protecting myself in the right places. Reviewing and updating risk mitigation plans. Where am I at risk? What are we doing, and who are we buying from? That's really a risk factor for us, and how will we react if X happens? And so we're helping some companies do that kind of thing, look at and mitigate their risk, and staying flexible, having more than one way to get something done and being able to quickly shift when either demand shifts or the economic condition changes a little bit, and you can make sure that you're ready for that, whatever may happen. It's like whether it's the pandemic or even the Hurricane Helene that hit the mountains of Tennessee and North Carolina and Western Virginia, and how they were affected, and how some of those businesses still aren't back up. Some of these things we can't see coming. We just can't see coming. However, of all the things that we imagine, because in South Carolina, we know we get hurricanes, sometimes we get tornadoes. Of all the things that can happen, have we done any looking into our systems, looking into our supply chain and going, if the what if happens, what could we do? If we get flooded, what could we do? That kind of
Right.
thing.
That brings up a good point, though, is because a lot of times the focus is purely on a global supply chain and some of those risk factors in other countries and getting cut off from that. But just like you talked about Hurricane Helene and the impacts it's had, which is long standing. I mean, those areas are still not
Mhm.
completely up. Even domestic supply chains having to think through where I get something, am I in an area where there's a lot of, terrible weather, like you said,
Mhm.
tornadoes, things that could impact a facility that I source from, and it's the only facility I source from, and they happen to
Right.
be in an area that has, is in Tornado Alley, for instance, or something like that. I mean, we can't overlook the fact that even domestically, there are areas that are prone to a lot of natural disasters. And have you thought through even those situations where you might need to have a
Mhm.
backup supplier who's not in the same area, right? So
Yeah.
that's something we tend to forget about. I guess we will kind of look at the global situation and forget about our own domestic suppliers and how we make sure that we, de-risk that a bit when possible.
Mhm. And it's good to just look beyond one single region as well. Like, it would be great if I had 3 suppliers in a certain region that could all do the same thing for me, but if they're all in the same region, maybe I need to scatter them a little bit, right?
Right.
And I'm sure, like, I've never lived in the North where we have blizzards and snow all the time, and I know they deal with it a whole lot better than us Southerners do. But I imagine that companies get hit by blizzards every year, every 2 or 3 years, probably have some protocols on if my people absolutely can't get to work and what do we do? And we need to think a little bit more proactively here where we are. We've been pretty protected in South Carolina. I mean, we get some hurricanes up off the coast or whatever, but nobody was prepared for what happened in the mountains. And, I've got to hand it to the Baxter Corporation up in North Cove, which is McDowell County in North Carolina. And, they could no longer make IV solutions, and they were the predominant IV solution company in America. I mean, shortages started immediately, right? The very next weekend, we were getting calls like, "Does anybody else do IV solutions?" And they did a heroic effort and brought in, I think I read 2,000 people to help do remediation and get that place up and going. I mean, they brought their own employees back within a couple of weeks just to help clean up muck, and then it took, weeks for them to sanitize and get equipment running again that had been flooded and that kind of thing. It was a heroic effort. But where would we be if they hadn't had the resources to do that? I mean, there would be people
Absolutely.
dying in hospitals because they couldn't get saline solution or whatever they needed. So but I'm sure at some point Baxter will rethink that and go, we need to have more than one really big plant doing this somewhere, right?
Right.
And if you're big enough that you can think about that type of diversification for yourself, maybe you have a different location that's not in the same, floodplain or whatever. So there's just a lot of different ways to look at. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing you were talking about is being able to use the Connex database to connect all of these manufacturers. I mean, and that's been going on now for the past couple of years.
About 2 years now, yeah.
Okay, so I mean, based on that, what's the success level? For making those connections you otherwise wouldn't have made? Because I'm sure a lot of times it's well, I didn't even know I had a supplier 2 counties over that can do, you know what I mean? Because that's
Mhm.
not visible. Have you had some success stories around just this whole initiative that you could share and kind of show what kind of traction has been made so far with that?
I can. I don't have as many numbers to share as I like because I find that companies are a little bit closed mouth when it comes to talk about revenues. However, I guess going back a little bit, back in August of last year, we had a business to business network event. We called that a B2B. And it was only for CONNEX members. And we had 6 OEMs scheduled to be there as buyers. And we set tables up where they could, get in line and have 10 minutes with these buyer, at a table with the buyers. We ended up having one OEM had issues that day and dropped out, but we had 5. And so in follow-ups to that, I got stories about Well, I mean, I am in talk with this OEM and I am in talk with that one, and it hasn't landed yet. And so prior to that, I think the impact of COVID from companies that had found business or been found by companies looking in South Carolina was probably 750 to a million-ish dollars, right? So coming out of that B2B event in August, just last month, I found out that one of the companies had established another $6 million in contract opportunities from people he met standing in line. So it wasn't with the OEMs; it's with people he met standing in line. And so there's been a few. It was like $2,000 here, and then there's people that were in those negotiations with the OEMs that it hadn't landed yet, or they've been unwilling to tell me. So I'm guessing that one event was somewhere between probably $6 and $10 million in impacts to South Carolina manufacturers, and I may never know the real number. But because of that, we were so excited that we have turned around and scheduled another one for next month. So the first one was in Greenville. The one next month is going to be in Somerville. And so lessons learned from I got business standing in line. In addition to the OEM meetings that we've got set up, we're going to set up some kind of lightning rounds of networking for the people that are there as suppliers. And that way they'll have a set amount of time to go around the table, tell the other folks what they do, what they sell, and maybe even what they're looking for. They may have needs. I mean, they're also manufacturers, right? And see if we can't help facilitate more of this. Let's all do business with each other. And so the qualifications for coming as a supplier is that you must be a CONNEX member. So anyone listening to this that's doing manufacturing in South Carolina that is not a CONNEX member needs to reach out to us immediately so that we can get you vetted and get you on the list. So,
Yeah, and
but
I'll be sure to add
very
that to the
exciting.
episode notes too, because that's like you said, if there's still access available to
Mm-hmm.
manufacturers, they certainly need to jump on that. Because again, like you said, even that event, I mean, that's pretty wild that you can go to an event that's really focused on this, the whole premise of B2B, and just serendipitously have a conversation while you're in line and it turn into something that's pretty
Mm-hmm.
significant. I mean, 6 million is nothing to,
Oh,
nothing to
yeah.
turn your nose up at. So it's just the right place at the right time under the right circumstances, right? So that's pretty amazing. So are there any more B2B events planned or just the one in Somerville right now?
Right now, just the one in Somerville.
Okay.
I don't know if there'll be another one in the fall yet or not. And I don't know if the attendance will be limited to the one in Somerville. And that's why I say people need to move quickly. We have four companies agreeing to come as buyers at this point. I'd love to have 6 or 8, but we can do it with 4. I've got a boat company. I have got a cooling system company. I have got a utility vehicle component company, and right now I also have a company in the refrigeration space. So we've got 4. I've got feelers out on a few more that I think may come around, and so we'll be getting that information out there. Our I guess our promo is probably going to start this week. Actually, we just nailed down that we were definitely going to do it last week.
Okay, awesome. I guess, one more thing before we close out, but I think having experience with both the CONNEX database and how that's set up and then B2B events as well, any best practices that you would suggest to manufacturers when participating in things like this to kind of put their best foot forward, right? I mean, obviously you have to kind of, to the best of your ability, represent your company effectively so people are
Right.
enticed to want to work with you. I'm sure there's probably some things that you've seen along the way that's like, this is really key if you want to draw attention to your company and expand your portfolio of customers. Any suggestions that you would share with the audience?
Yes, actually, I've been thinking about this. I think one, having a really good, concise elevator pitch. You're going to get a limited amount of time to tell these people what you do. And so a really concise elevator pitch to where you clearly explain what you're capable of. Now, talking about your capabilities doesn't mean you need to recite your equipment list, right?
Right.
But you need to tell them what you can do with that equipment. If your equipment list is important, then have it in writing. Bring a one pager. You don't need to bring a whole folder of stuff. People don't really want to carry a lot of stuff home. But if you could bring a really concise one pager that talks about who you are and what you do, and what's unique about you, and what are the benefits. Companies often forget to talk about the benefits of working with me. I'm in your back door. I can deliver on time. We have, a 99.99% quality rate, or whatever it is that makes you a preferred supplier. Those are the things that you need to be prepared to talk about, because companies want to know what makes you special from the next person I'm going to talk to that may have the same exact equipment list that you do, right? So you
Right.
want to just have a really good, honed, comfortable pitch. You want to make eye contact, things we tell our teenagers, but they don't always do. Don't look at your shoes, make really good eye contact, good firm handshake, right? But then don't be shy, and not everybody that comes to these is a salesperson. A lot of times it's the guy that started the business and running the shop, or the lady that started the business and is running the business. And so, but you can't be shy. You need to be present, and you need to listen to the needs of the people that you talk to. Take really good notes, because you're going to meet a lot of people, and you're going to need to sort them out when you get home, right? And
Right.
so, but then again, not everybody you reach out to that you met that sounded interested is going to respond. So just know that everybody's busy, and that's just kind of how life is. And so, but you take those opportunities, because the guy that he ended up with 6 million broken over 2 different people he talked to. So it wasn't all one company. It wasn't one huge. But if he hadn't have had those conversations, he would have walked out of there and they may never have met. So you've got to be willing to have those conversations with people.
Yeah, absolutely. Leave yourself open to those conversations. You never know what's going
Mhm.
to come from that, right? And it
Yeah,
could be a connection of a connection, but that's really good advice. I just think sometimes it's, really what are the success factors for situations like that? What are things that manufacturers can do? And they tend to be really humble about what they do, right? They let their product
yeah,
speak for themselves, but sometimes you got to brag on yourself because you're doing some amazing things and you're really setting yourself apart. But sometimes we don't lead with that. And I think it's a missed opportunity, especially if you're meeting someone for the first time.
that's right. And if you're a preferred supplier, or you've gotten an award from one of your other customers, particularly if it's a name that people are going to recognize, be sure you drop that in or have it on your material. You want people to know that somebody thinks you do a good job, right? And
Right.
and I go in a company, I've been visiting companies for almost 30 years. I see these plaques on their wall when I walk into the lobby, supplier of the year and this, that, or the other, but I don't hear them talk about it. So
Right. Yeah, the more you can brag on the things that you're doing and what you're capable of, the better off you are. But sometimes we just don't do that.
mhm,
We kind of keep that to ourselves, right? And I think it's just such a shame because we know, like you said, we see so many manufacturers doing amazing stuff and their cabinets full of all these awards, but that's not what they normally talk about. So I know when it's B2B, it's very short and like you said, short burst conversations, and it's like, where do I start? But those are definitely some things I think are great to highlight.
yeah.
Um,
Another one, if I can throw one more, is
yeah.
we'll be releasing the list of the companies that are coming. So do your homework,
Yeah.
right? Do your homework on them,
Yeah, it always behooves you to know, it's like any other interview you would do, right? You wouldn't just
right?
come and not know anything about the company that you're about to talk to. So it's always good to do a little bit of research before you arrive. Is there anything else that you think would be a great takeaway for the audience who's listening, with regards to supply chain or the Connects database? Anything else that you would like to share before we close out today?
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't just point out that SCMEP is a great resource for you if you need help. Diversifying your supply base, we can help, with connects and supplier scouting, strengthening your relationships. If you need help putting in programs for that, or putting in systems and programs for anything, we can help with that. Some of companies that are listening are going to need to up their game when it comes to their quality certifications, right? We've sadly had companies think they could compete in certain industries, and they weren't really prepared to do that because they didn't really understand the requirements. We actually have a webinar coming up in a couple of months, and you may remember the date of that more than I do. May
I think it's May, yeah.
yeah, what's the difference in ISO and IATF, which IATF is an automotive standard. So you may not necessarily have to have IATF to compete in the automotive market, but do you know what you need in addition to just your ISO? So those kind of things that we can help with. And then, if you need help getting into CONNEX, finding suppliers, will help teach you the better search techniques to hone down that list. We will help you build your profile, make your profile look good in case you're looking for business out of that. And always, always just look for ways you continually improve your operation to make it better.
No, that's good advice. And I meant to ask you, how much longer is there access to joining CONNEX right now? Is there a deadline for that before that closes out for folks trying to join it right now, or is there a limit on how many people can join it?
There's no limit on how many companies can join. Of the 3,800 companies we have listed in it, they haven't all technically joined, claimed their profiles, and filled those out.
Okay.
So, what we really would like for all of those companies and more to do exactly that. We probably have about 230-ish companies that have joined. So others are listed, and the companies listed may be listed there, but there's no information about them past their name and maybe a brief description of them. So if somebody wanted to buy from them, it wouldn't really do them a whole lot of good. However, there is no limit. If companies want to join in order to get into this B2B event, though, probably by the end of the month. I mean, they really need
Okay.
to move on it. But that's
Okay.
the
Yeah.
end
So
of February. Yeah.
yeah, very time sensitive then. Okay. Yeah, we didn't talk about that, but I want to make sure if
Yeah.
people were going to try and take advantage of that, that they got on top of that. So we can certainly share information about that in the episode notes as well. And then
Yeah.
if I guess if they have questions about CONNEX, do they just need to reach out to you directly if they have questions about the CONNEX database or want to discuss that in more depth to see if it's a fit for them?
Yes, they are absolutely welcome to reach out to me directly.
Okay,
So,
perfect.
and there is on our website, there is a page at the very top, along the top right-hand side, you'll see CONNEX, and they can actually go in there and get more information and reach out as well. So,
Okay. Awesome. We'll make sure to share all those resources for everyone that's listening on the episode notes so they can quickly get there. But I just want to say I appreciate you joining me, Rhonda. I know
um,
you've been a colleague of mine for quite some time, but it's so nice to sit down and actually have a conversation about some of the work that you're doing and how you're being involved in supply chain. I know that's a transition from business development, but thanks so much for joining me today.
and thank you for the opportunity. I hope that we have some companies decide to take advantage of this opportunity while they still can. So hopefully we'll get some of them in the B2B. We'd love to see you there.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you, Adrian.
Thanks for joining this episode of the Six M's of Manufacturing podcast. I'd like to say a heartfelt thank you to my colleague, Rhonda Huskins. At the end of this month, Rhonda's going to be closing out her career with SCMEP, and we wish her the very best in this next phase. She is definitely going to be missed. Be sure to visit the episode notes for details and links related to our discussion today. And if you haven't, go claim your CONNEX profile. You could be a few clicks away from your next big opportunity. Did you learn something new from this episode? That's awesome. Be sure to follow our podcast and share with your network. And remember, don't just make it better.